before the first mountain was ever thrust toward the sky. Before the oceans carved their basins into the broken earth. Before the continents were torn from one another. There was a world. A world of one landmass, one vast, lush, unified continent, bathed in a mild and perfect warmth, sheltered beneath a dome of sky, unlike anything in our atmosphere today. A world where men lived for centuries, where the line between the heavenly and the earthly was thin beyond our comprehension. And it was a world standing on the edge of the most total catastrophe in the history of the human race. In the next 10 minutes, we will follow the evidence from the ancient records, from the ground beneath your feet, from the rock at the summit of Everest, and from the testimony of over 200 civilizations who never forgot what happened. This is not mythology. This is history. To understand the flood, you must first understand the world it destroyed. The antediluvian earth was not the world outside your window. Genesis records that at creation, God gathered the waters into one place and caused the dry land to appear. One gathering, one landmass. The pre-flood world was a unified continent, not the shattered, ocean-separated fragments we have today. Above the solid vaulted firmament, what scripture calls the rakia, lay a vast reservoir of celestial water, held in place since creation's second day. This canopy over the earth created a uniform warmth and pressure across the entire world. There were no polar ice caps, no deserts, no extreme seasons. The Genesis record confirms it. A mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. A mist, not rain. And in this world, humanity flourished. Pre-flood genealogies record men living for 800 and 900 years. Methuselah reached 969. This was not mythology. This was the biological reality of a world sheltered by its intact atmospheric architecture. Now here is the fact that changes everything about how you read the Genesis flood. And it comes directly from the scripture itself. The Himalayas did not exist before the flood. The Alps did not exist. The Andes, the Rockies, the great mountain ranges that define our maps today, they were not there. They were thrust upward by the catastrophic tectonic violence of the flood event itself. The pre-flood mountains were hills and ridges of modest elevation, enough to define the geography of a unified continent, but nothing approaching the extreme peaks produced by the geological forces of the deluge. The antediluvian world had a gentler, more uniform landscape. Whitcomb and Morris in the Genesis flood document this extensively. The current mountain ranges bear unmistakable evidence of formation by catastrophic hydraulic and tectonic forces, not millions of years of gradual process. And Psalm 104 confirms it with precision. The psalmist, under divine inspiration, describes the waters standing above the mountains, and then, as God rebuked them, the mountains rising and the valleys sinking to their appointed places. The mountains rose as the waters receded. They were formed by the flood itself. This is not poetry without meaning. This is geological testimony written 3,000 years before modern science began reconstructing the same story from the fossil record. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Psalm 134:8.
But why did this world end? The historical record in Genesis is precise. The wickedness of humanity had reached a depth that grieved the very heart of God. Every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. And at the center of this corruption lay something more than ordinary moral failure. The Bene Elohim, the sons of God, had descended and taken wives from among the daughters of men. The book of Enoch, directly referenced by the Apostle Jude in the New Testament, names them. The Watchers, 200 fallen divine beings who descended upon Mount Hermon and swore an oath together to corrupt the earth. Their offspring were the Nephilim, giants of enormous stature and corrupted nature, neither fully of God's original design, nor entirely human. They taught humanity sorcery, the forbidden arts, the knowledge of weapons of war. Entire civilizations were built on these corrupted foundations. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. Genesis 6:4. The contamination spread through bloodline after bloodline across the antediluvian world. Gary Wayne, in the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and Ryan Pitterson in Judgment of the Nephilim, both document what Scripture already declares. This corruption was genetic, spiritual, and generational. All flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Against this backdrop, one man stood apart: Noah, a just man, perfect in his generations, who walked with God. That Hebrew word perfect, tamium, is the same word used in Levitical law to describe a sacrificial animal without blemish or defect. It was not merely a statement of moral character. It was a genealogical declaration. Noah's bloodline remained uncorrupted, and that distinction made him the only viable candidate for preservation. For 120 years, Noah preached and built. Every stroke of the hammer was a sermon. Every plank laid was a warning. God waited, long-suffering and patient, not willing that any should perish. And then the day came. Genesis 7:11 records it with the precision of a court document. The 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day of the month. On that calendar date, two simultaneous catastrophic mechanisms were activated. The same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Genesis 7:11. From above, the windows of the firmament, the Arubath, the latticed sluice gates in the solid dome,
were thrown open, releasing the primordial waters held above since creation's second day. From below, the great deep, the Tehom Rabbah, the vast pressurized subterranean chambers beneath the earth, were burst open with the Hebrew word baka. To cleave, to tear asunder by force, geysers of superheated water and steam erupted from beneath the earth's crust with a violence no subsequent geological event has replicated. The waters came from above and below simultaneously. And as the subterranean chambers collapsed, the earth's crust fractured and shifted. Some sections plunging downward to form the deep ocean basins, others being thrust violently upward to create the mountain ranges that tower over our world today. The unified antediluvian continent split apart. The world was remade. The God who shut the ark door was the same God who opened the windows of heaven. This was not an accident. It was sovereign judgment. Precise, total, and executed on a specific date.
Here is one of the most extraordinary facts in the history of human civilization, and one that secular scholarship has never adequately explained. Across virtually every major culture on Earth, cultures separated by oceans, continents, and centuries, cultures with no contact with one another, there are ancient flood traditions. The Mesopotamian Gilgamesh epic, the Sumerian king list, the Chaldean account documented by the 19th century archaeologist George Smith, the Hindu Manu flood narrative, the Chinese traditions of a great deluge, the Native American flood accounts across dozens of tribes and nations. Researchers have cataloged more than 200 independent flood traditions from cultures across every inhabited continent. The common elements are striking. Catastrophic waters that destroyed a former world, a righteous man or family chosen for preservation, a vessel, animals gathered, and the emergence of a new human civilization from the aftermath. The near-universal distribution of these traditions across cultures that could not have shared their stories points not to shared mythology. It points to shared memory. Memory of an event so total, so catastrophic, so undeniable, that its echo reached every corner of the earth. Because it happened to the entire earth.
Now let the physical evidence speak. At the summit of Mount Everest, the highest point on the surface of the Earth, there are marine fossils, fossilized sea creatures, shells of organisms that could only have lived beneath the ocean, embedded in the rock at 29,000 feet above sea level. Mainstream geology explains this as the result of slow tectonic uplift over millions of years. But the fossils found in those mountain strata are not fossils of organisms slowly buried over eons. They are organisms catastrophically buried under massive hydraulic pressure. The sedimentary layers in which they rest show evidence of rapid deposition. The kind a global hydraulic event of incomprehensible scale would produce in days, not millennia. Philip Ernest Williams in the Archaeological Evidence of Noah's Flood in Whitcomb and Morris in the Genesis. Flood both document the same conclusion. The rock itself is testifying to. Those mountains were thrust upward by the flood. You cannot use the result of a catastrophe to disprove the catastrophe that produced it. And there is more across mountain ranges worldwide. Geologists have found polystrate fossils, trees spanning multiple geological layers that uniformitarian models require hundreds of thousands of years to deposit. A tree cannot stand partially fossilized for millions of years, while sediment accumulates around it. It would decay. These fossils are only coherent if those layers were deposited in a single catastrophic event, rapidly, simultaneously. Exactly as Genesis 7 describes.
The investigation of the Ark itself provides a further remarkable convergence. When Ron Wyatt examined the Durapanar site in eastern Turkey, he documented a boat-shaped formation approximately 515 feet in length, matching the biblical dimensions of the Ark with striking precision. The formation sits at approximately 6,300 feet in elevation. This moderate elevation is itself significant. If the mountains of Ararat had reached their present 16,000-foot height before the flood, a resting point at 6,000 feet would make no sense. But if those mountains were still rising as the flood waters receded, which Psalm 1-4 explicitly records, then the Ark came to rest precisely where the receding water left it, on a still rising mountain. The location is a confirmation, not a problem. And then there is the human genome. Nathaniel T. Jensen's work in trace demonstrates that the genetic diversity of all present human populations traces to a small founding group, a genuine biological bottleneck consistent with the biblical account of 8 survivors. The mitochondrial DNA lineages of every living human converge toward a common ancestral origin. The Y chromosome lineages converge toward the same point. The genetic record does not contradict the Genesis account. It confirms it. 200 flood traditions, marine fossils at Everest, polystrate trees, a boat-shaped formation on a still rising mountain, converging DNA lineages. Each line of evidence pointing to the same event. The science of the flood begins with understanding the pre-flood architecture of the earth. An architecture that Genesis 1 describes with a precision we are only beginning to appreciate. God established 2 distinct water systems at creation. Above the solid firmament, the Rakia, lay a vast reservoir. The waters above the firmament, below the Earth's surface, in an immense network of pressurized subterranean chambers, lay the great deep, the Tehom Rabbah. The pre-flood mist irrigation of Genesis 2:6 indicates these subterranean systems were actively cycling water upward through the earth,
sustaining the entire unified continent without rainfall. On the day of the flood, both systems were activated simultaneously. The firmament windows released the upper reservoir in catastrophic volume. The subterranean chambers were burst open, Baka, violent bursting asunder. Whitcomb and Morris calculated that the subterranean rupture alone would have produced tectonic upheaval of incomprehensible scale. Not merely flooding, but the wholesale restructuring of the Earth's crust. Now here is the scientific key that resolves the most common objection. People say, there is not enough water to cover Everest. And that is correct in today's world. But the objection is methodologically flawed. It assumes the pre-flood mountains were the same height as the post-flood mountains. They were not. Genesis 7:20 states the waters prevailed 15 cubits, approximately 22 feet, above the highest peaks. If the pre-flood mountains were of modest elevation, as the geological and scriptural evidence requires, then the water volume from both the celestial reservoir and the subterranean deep was entirely sufficient for universal coverage.
The collapse of the upper water canopy permanently altered the biological environment of the Earth. The pre-flood canopy provided uniform ultraviolet filtration across the entire Earth's surface and maintained elevated atmospheric pressure. The conditions that sustained 900-year lifespans. When the canopy collapsed through the opened firmament windows, ultraviolet radiation increased dramatically. Atmospheric pressure changed. The biological infrastructure supporting pre-flood longevity was gone permanently. And Genesis 11 records the result. Post-flood lifespans dropped precipitously within a few generations. This is not coincidence. This is the biological consequence of a permanent atmospheric transformation. One that the flood's cosmological reset brought about. The world that emerged from the floodwaters was a different Earth, at a different biological baseline under different atmospheric conditions. The mountains that tower over it today were made by the same event, and they carry in their marine fossils their folded strata and their catastrophically formed rock, the silent, permanent testimony of what occurred. All the history, all the archaeology, all the science, they point toward a truth that facts alone cannot carry. The flood was not primarily a story about water. It was a story about grace. God waited 120 years. He sent a preacher. He built a way of escape. He held the door open for 12 decades to a people who would not enter. And when mercy's time ran out, the same hand that had extended the invitation executed the judgment. But within that judgment, he preserved one family. 8 souls.
the uncontaminated line through which the promised Redeemer would one day come. Noah was not saved because he was perfect. He was saved because he walked with God, and God counted it to him as righteousness. That same grace, the grace that called Noah into the ark, is the grace that calls you today.
For by grace are ye saved through faith.
And that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. The rainbow that God placed in the cloud after the flood still stands over every generation. The covenant it represents is still in force. The God of the flood is the God of the gospel, perfectly just and overflowing with grace toward those who will walk with Him. The mountains that rise across the post-flood earth are not obstacles to faith in Genesis. They are witnesses to it. Their marine fossils cry from their summits. Their folded strata testify to forces no gradual process produced. And the God who thrust those mountains upward through the judgment, that God calls still with the same invitation He gave to Noah. But it will not remain open forever.
The mountains of today are not obstacles to faith in the Genesis account. They are witnesses to it. If this study has deepened your understanding of the world before the flood, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more studies like this one, and leave a comment. We want to know what moved you most. Forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven. Psalm 11:19-89.